Dear respected teacher, dear beloved Suko Chankong, dear beloved community, it is a joy to be with you all today, to be together as a community on the third day of our retreat, Spirituality, Science and Action. Today is the 22nd of May in the year 2022. And we are in the upper hamlet of Plum village in France. Yesterday, with my Dhamma sharing family, when I asked everybody to introduce themselves, and I asked everybody to say what they're up to. What are you up to? What are we up to? Here. What are we doing? Many different kinds of answer are possible. That question has something to do with the question, what should I do with my life? What should I do with this one precious life? You may feel like you've already decided. You've chosen your career, you've chosen your path. Maybe it feels like that decision is behind you, but I'm not sure. I think we can be making that decision every day, every moment. What should I do with my life? And the answer to that question has something to do with the state of our planet. Because we may have been answering that question in an individualistic way for the last few decades, at least. I know in my generation, when I was invited to ask myself that question as a child, it was always in terms of me. What do you want to do? What's your dream? You could be anything. You could do anything. And the sense was that whatever I did would affect only me. And that I was free to choose based on my desire. Based on my preference, based on my wish, my dreams. And it looks like an individual question. And even if we've been giving an individual answer to that question for the last few decades, actually we've been answering it under the shadow of a collective dream. And strangely, it's the collective dream of individualism that has been leading us to this present situation. So, nowadays, I think it's very clear that we cannot ask that question as an individual. We can only ask that question in the light of our collective impact on the planet. Good, bad, and mixed. So we have to find a new way to answer the question. And maybe the question isn't, what do I want to do with my life? But what do we want to do with our lives together? And in fact, what are we doing now, right now? What are we doing with our lives? How are we using this moment? In the title of the retreat, Spirituality, Science and Action, it could lead you to think that there's a difference between spirituality on the one hand and action on the other hand. That spirituality is not action. And in that framework, in that way of thinking, what we're doing now would be maybe taking a break. Taking a break from our career, from our business, from answering emails. We're just kind of checking out. Just, go inside and take care of ourselves. But that's an interior experience, and at some point, the retreat will end and we have to go back to the real world. I wonder where Plum Village stops and the real world starts. Very interesting. And I'm not totally convinced that this isn't the real world. I think this world may be very real. And I'm not convinced that we're not doing anything. I think we may be doing a lot, even though we're sitting very still. We're practicing silence, practicing being aware of our bodies, our breath, relaxing, calming our minds. Yes, but what does it do? Well, I think we are engaged in a kind of experiment. An experiment in collective practice. It's also an experiment in systems change. These days we hear a lot about systems change. Well, Plum Village is an experiment in systems change, and it's an experiment in collective living. And we can ask, what do we do? What do we produce? And I think we actually produce a lot. Our main product is awakening, insight. We generate awakening. We do it together. And if we use our time well, we could generate a lot of awakening. And that should not be underestimated as a kind of power to change the world. It's already changing the world because we're in the world. We are the world. So if we're changing, the world is changing, for sure. Our teacher, Tai, he said something which I think is very important. In relation to this question, what should we do with our life? He said, "It is my conviction that we cannot change the world unless we're able to change our way of thinking, change our consciousness." So that's also what we're up to here. This is also an experiment in collective transformation of consciousness, transformation of view, transformation of the way of thinking. We know that our way of thinking somehow gives rise to our way of living. And our way of living currently is doing a lot of harm. We are in critical danger as a species. We are endangering the livability of this planet for our future generations, for the young people alive right now. And we have a short time in which we can act to change the course that we're on. And somehow we know that already. We get it. We get that we need to live in a different way, to consume in a different way, to produce in a different way. But if we haven't yet changed our way of living, it may be because the insight isn't yet strong enough. We know that if the insight is very strong, we will change our way of living. So that's what we're up to here. We are going to see if we can strengthen that insight to produce a transformation in our way of living together. This is something possible. What we're up to is collective awakening. And that's not something in the future, that's something that we're doing right now. Because the collective is made of individuals. It's made of us. So if we can wake up, that is already a part of the collective awakening. So when you come to a retreat in Plum Village, you are offered all kinds of different practices. And it might look like those practices are sort of disparate, different things. One over here, one over there. We practice some sitting. I like sitting meditation. Practice walking. Oh, I don't know. Is it deep enough? Oh. And we practice service meditation. No, I prefer sitting. But actually, all of those practices fit together. They are part of an integrated whole. They only work together. And what that integrated set of practices does together is produce a transformation in our view, in our consciousness. So yesterday we had the chance to hear about one very important part of that transformation from Sukho Langnyam, which is called right diligence. So maybe not everybody here today was there yesterday, so I'll just go over it very quickly, but it's essentially the ability to generate a feeling of joy, a feeling of happiness, a feeling of compassion, to bring it up when it's not there, to maintain it for a long time when it is there, and when there's a feeling of suffering, to know how to take care of it, to help it go back to sleep. And when a feeling of suffering is not there, to know how not to trigger it, not to bring it up. These are the four aspects of right diligence. And this is very important. In a sense, you could see right diligence as trauma therapy. And we know that that is very, very important right now. There is a social theorist called Bob Doppelt, who has been writing and speaking on the topic of climate anxiety. And the feelings of despair and doom that may come up whenever we read the news, for example, whenever we learn about the state of our planet, especially in young people. There's a lot of despair, a lot of anxiety. When we look at the state of our planet, the situation of our civilization, he identifies three types of action that we need to engage in. So the first is mitigation, to mitigate the harm that we are doing, which means to harm less or even to stop producing greenhouse gases, to stop polluting the planet, to stop destroying the habitat of the wild world. Mitigation. The second is adaptation. We know that we are already on track for a considerable amount of heating. This is going to cause increasingly violent weather events. Just a few days ago, there was a tornado in Germany which killed one person and injured dozens more. We're in the midst of a terrible heat wave in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, in Europe now. It's the hottest day ever in May, yesterday, in Spain. And the heat wave is coming to the US as well. The hottest May on record. And that's now, but we know that there's already a lot of heating baked into the system, which is going to increase, so that's going to affect our infrastructure, our roads, our cities, our production of food, our ability to live. So we need to adapt. It's the second part. Mitigation, do less harm, adapt to the harm that we've already set in motion. But the third part, he says, is maybe the most neglected, which is to take care of human resilience. Because we as human beings, we need to be able to cope with the situation that we find ourselves in. If we're overwhelmed, then we will either freeze and try to ignore what's going on, try and shut down, cover up, distract ourselves. We know very well how to do that, and there's many ways to do that available. Or we may also react in a way that makes the situation worse. We could panic. So he said, based on my own experiences, no response to the climate crisis will succeed unless individuals and groups of all types around the globe understand how trauma and toxic stress affects their minds and their bodies. No response to the climate crisis will succeed unless individuals and groups of all types around the globe understand how trauma and toxic stress affects their minds and their bodies, and use skills to calm their emotions and thoughts, learn from and find meaning, direction, and hope in adversity. It's very interesting. So let's look at that a little bit more. The Buddha was a wonderful teacher, and he already gave us such a clear way. So let's have a look a little bit at the way he showed us. So what he said is that there is ill-being. This is known as the first noble truth. There is suffering. And I think we can confirm, experimentally, just check, yep, there is ill-being. Can you check? It's worth checking. You don't take it for granted. Don't take anybody's word for it. See for yourself. Right? There is ill-being. Sometimes Buddhism is a little bit misunderstood, and it can be mischaracterized as a kind of negative way of thought, because it's all about suffering. It's not. There's good news. He also said that, well, that ill-being somehow has roots. It doesn't come from nowhere. There are causes and conditions that have brought it to be. And when I first encountered this teaching, I had the impression that it was talking about things in the past. Right? I thought what it meant was I have to kind of go back into my childhood and maybe my ancestors and find out all the terrible things that happened to me. And then if I can understand all those terrible things that happened to me, then somehow, something. But I'm not sure that those roots, here are some roots. I'm not sure that those roots are really in the past. If you look at a tree, are the roots of the tree in the past? I don't think the tree would work very well if its roots were only in the past. So somehow, if the suffering is here now, it means it's getting food. It's being nourished. Right? If something doesn't have food, it doesn't have sustenance, it dies. So if there's still suffering, it's because we are maintaining it. So it's worth, this is what the Buddha said, he said, look deeply into your suffering. Don't be afraid of it. You can learn from it. So he didn't say there is suffering in order to make us feel depressed. He said there is suffering and you can learn from it. You can transform your suffering into understanding, into compassion, into awakening. And the way to understand it is to understand how it has come to be, how it is continuing to manifest. What are we doing that is sustaining that suffering? So yesterday, Sister Langniam spoke about how our perceptions come about, the 5 universal mental formations, that we're constantly assailed by sensory impressions, by contact. Many, many, many millions of sensory impressions in every moment. And some of those impressions pass a threshold and we become aware of them, we pay attention to them. So from contact we have attention. Our attention is drawn by a sound, by a sudden movement. We pay attention. Or we can choose to pay attention to our breath, to our steps, to another person. And on the basis of that attention, we have a feeling. A feeling comes up. And on the basis of that feeling, a perception is produced. And this is very interesting because for a long time in Western science, in neuroscience, it was thought not to be that way around. That it was understood that we have perceptions about the world, and on the basis of those perceptions, we feel things. We like, we don't like, we feel neutral. But the Buddhist tradition says, no, actually, and of course it's not totally linear, there's lots of feedback, it's very non-linear, but largely, on the basis of our feelings, a perception is born. Very interesting. And this has been confirmed in Western neuroscience. It's called the primacy of affect. The primacy of affect. It means the feeling comes first. And on the basis of a feeling, you see something. If you're very afraid, and we see this in situations of police shootings. If the police officer has nourished their fear about a certain kind of person or a certain area that they're in, or there's a culture of fear or anger or discrimination or racism, then when somebody pulls a mobile phone out of their pocket, the police officer may have a perception which is not accurate. They may not see a mobile phone because they already have a feeling, a bad feeling. This situation is dangerous. I'm in danger. I need to protect myself. I see a gun. Shoot. And you have to shoot first, because otherwise you're dead. And we know that that happens, and that the police officers report, I saw a gun, and they're not lying. They did see a gun. It's very strange. So the perception may be very inaccurate based on the feeling that we have. And based on that perception, we have a volition. We intend. We want to respond, to shoot, not to shoot, to act, not to act, to say something, to do something. So we have to really take care of that process, that rapidly unfolding process from all these sensory impressions becoming what we attend to, what we feel, what we perceive, and what we intend, what we will, what we decide to do. Happens in the blink of an eye. So we need to learn how to take care of our feelings, because our feelings are driving our actions and our reactions. So this is what we're doing. This is what we learned about yesterday, how to take care of our feelings, how to take care of a painful feeling, how to give rise to a wonderful, positive feeling. Okay, that's the review, okay? A little bit from yesterday, just for the benefit of those who were not there. So, the Buddha also said something wonderful. The good news goes on. He said, well, yes, there's ill-being, but there's also the cessation of ill-being. And that is well-being. That's the good news. When ill-being ceases, well, that's well-being already. And he said that he had found a path that leads to the cessation of ill-being. So that's what we're going to look at today, the path. What is the path? It's very nice to have a path. And we know that this looking deeply into ill-being and the roots of ill-being has something to do with the path. We're not trying to run away from ill-being. We're not even trying to eradicate it, because actually we know that we can learn from it. All we're trying to do is not make more, because there's enough. There's plenty. So we don't need to make any more. And this well-being may also be understood as finding a way to be with the suffering that's in the world. And this is strange, it can seem a little paradoxical, to be with the suffering without suffering. Strange. Seems contradictory. Sometimes we are asked by young people how to cope with the crisis, with the situation that we find ourselves in. One person recently asked something like this: when I close my eyes, there is so much pain inside me. This is from a young climate activist. I just want to make it go away. Help me. Teach me. They want us to tell them how to make the pain go away. Okay. And then they say sometimes things like this. Say, well, when my friends are suffering, they're overwhelmed by pain, by doom, by despair. And I want to help them. How do I help them to feel better? How do I help them to cope? It's a very good question. A related question is, how do I deal with the suffering of racial injustice? What can we do about it? And there may be a habit of thinking, which is that until there is racial justice, I cannot be happy. I cannot be at peace. It's very challenging. So, as a Buddhist practitioner, we want to behave in a way that we are not the victim of our suffering. We want to become good stewards of pain. We want to be able to become good gardeners, to know how to make use of the suffering, to produce compassion, to produce insight. And our teacher also taught us about what he called the mechanics of compassion. We know that compassion is a powerful force in the world, and we may ask ourselves, well, how do I become a compassionate person, or a more compassionate person? What do I have to do? Where do I get it? Can I buy it? Can I subscribe? Put me on the compassion course. And he said something very interesting. He said, well, when we allow ourselves to be in touch with our suffering, compassion is born. When we allow ourselves to be in touch with our suffering, compassion arises. So, is being in touch with the suffering in a particular way, in a skillful way. And it means not being overwhelmed by the suffering. So, this is what we are up to. This is what we're learning how to do. Yesterday, we encountered one element of the path, which is sometimes known as the Noble Eightfold Path. And we heard about right diligence. Which we've already spoken about a little bit. So when somebody comes to us and asks us, I close my eyes, there's so much pain inside, I just want to make it go away. What do we say to them? Because actually our insight is that maybe you don't want to make it go away. Maybe you shouldn't make it go away. Maybe you have to find a way to be with the pain in a way that produces compassion, in a way that helps you to grow and to wake up. So, of course, there's times when it's too much, and we can't do that. So we have to know when to ask for help, when to take refuge in our friends, in our community, when we need to replace the object of our attention with something nourishing, because we need to have the strength and the resilience to be able to sit with the pain. So that was a lot of what we heard about yesterday. Knowing how to bring up a positive mental formation. Because actually when we have joy in us, we can be with pain. The joy embraces the pain. So joy, knowing how to generate a feeling of joy, is in itself an act of resistance. It's an act of climate activism. When we're generating joy, and when we can generate joy together, we are increasing our resilience. We're increasing our capacity to deal with suffering, to handle suffering skillfully, to learn from it, to produce compassion, and to help others to learn from it. So we've learned about calming our body, because our pain has a way of manifesting in our body, in the tensions, the patterns of tension that we hold in the body. This is why our practice is body-focused. We want to learn how to listen to our body, to listen to those tensions, to the pain, and help it to calm down, to soothe it. This is very, very important. And our body is not just this body, it's also the Sangha body. We talk about embodied practice. We can also speak about embodiment and Sangha-bodiment. Or ensangament. This is our bigger body. And sometimes just being able to share with some friends who are really there for us is a way of being with the pain when it's too much for us. So we have to know how to be in this body, but also in the bigger body. And we've learned about taking care of the body and taking care of our feelings, knowing how to generate a feeling of joy, how to calm a feeling of pain, how to embrace it tenderly, with a lot of love, a lot of patience. But there's also something else that we can offer. So that first part can offer some relief. There can be some relief. You can feel a little bit better. But we can go further. We have more to offer. When they ask us, what can you say that will make it okay? Well, the answer is subtle. In a way, it's really not okay. The current situation is not okay. At one level. But there's another level at which maybe it is okay. So that's what we're going to explore. So we have a path. And we know that one element of that path is right view. In some ways, you could say that this is the foundation. We are in the business of transforming our view, transforming our mind, transforming our consciousness together, collectively. That's what this retreat is for. And in order to come to right view, we have this wonderful set of practices we have right mindfulness. And we know that when we practice right mindfulness, it leads to right concentration. You can see it up here in the stained glass. Smriti, samadhi, prajna. Mindfulness leads to concentration, leads to insight. And again, it's not exactly linear. Okay, they all inter-are. They all depend on each other. They all support each other. We are cultivating the energy of mindfulness in everything that we do. In our breathing, in our walking, in our way of eating, in our way of being together. But this right mindfulness suggests that maybe there's a wrong mindfulness. What would that look like? Well, our teacher sometimes gave the example of a bank robber. So a bank robber, when he wants to crack a safe, is very mindful, very attentive. But you feel like maybe there's something wrong. So your intention matters. So we need to look into our intention even when we cultivate mindfulness. If our intention is to use mindfulness in order to get somewhere, get something, maybe get rich. Mindfulness is booming. I could make a career. I could make an app. I could charge people lots of money. I could make an online course. I could repackage Thay's teachings and sell them. Yeah, and that's happening. So our intention can be mixed as well. Of course, there may be an intention to help, to spread the teachings. That's a good intention. But we have to be very careful not to lie to ourselves about our real intentions. Otherwise, we endanger the teaching. If we appropriate mindfulness, if we take it out of its context, if we use it as a tool, we instrumentalize it, then we risk to lose everything. Our teacher gave us a very strong warning about this in 2014. He said, mindfulness is a path, not a tool. It can only be understood in the context of the Noble Eightfold Path, in the context of a system of ethics. And if you take it out of that context, you may denature it. And we know that in the West we're very good at appropriating and exploiting the resources of other cultures. So we need to be very careful when we encounter this teaching, the wisdom that comes to us from this ancient stream of Buddhist teaching. So our teacher said, when he was asked the question, is it okay to teach mindfulness to corporations? There has been a criticism in the world of muck mindfulness. that maybe mindfulness is being used as a way to prop up capitalism, an extractive and exploitative system which causes us a lot of stress and burnout, right? We know that the system, this way of living is burning us up, is burning up the planet, and maybe we can use a little bit of mindfulness to make it tolerable just for a little bit longer. Squeeze out a little bit more out of your employees. Help them to relax so they can bear it. And so you can get more out of them. Maybe more money, more creativity. Well, that would definitely be taking mindfulness outside of its context. That would be an appropriation, misuse. So when Tai was asked, can you teach mindfulness in a corporation? He said, yes, you can. But only if you teach right mindfulness in the context of the Eightfold Path, in the context of a system of ethics, which we'll hear more about tomorrow. The basis of our ethics is right view. And how can we characterize right view? Well, there are many ways. But I think maybe the simplest for today is to talk about the insight of interbeing. And Tai has said that this insight of interbeing is our meta-ethics. It's the foundation of our ethical system. So we would do well to understand it. And this right view is the basis of right thinking, right speech, and right action. So I remember we were maybe thinking that spirituality is not action. Well, right action is part of our path. And it's based on this insight of right view. Right view is a kind of view which is free from discrimination. And we can go a little bit more deeply into that. How do we get this insight of interbeing? We know in theory, we understand intellectually that we're all kind of interdependent, right? It's not that difficult to get. But the insight of interbeing is not an intellectual notion. It's an embodied wisdom. Is something that we can live and live from and act from, but it's not something that can be grasped by the intellect. In fact, we have to kind of challenge the intellect. We have to break free from some of the mental and verbal linguistic chains that are binding us. And there is a wonderful sutra called the Diamond Sutra that helps us to do that, to break free from the notions that trap us in the way of thinking and the way of seeing the world, which has given rise to this civilization, which has given rise to this system of exploitation, of extraction, of appropriation, of destruction. So we want to look deeply into the roots of our present situation of suffering. And it has something to do with our view, our way of seeing, our way of understanding the world. So the Diamond Sutra is a beautiful, wonderful, very challenging text. Tai has called it the first teaching on deep ecology. It's very ancient. It's not from the time of the Buddha, but maybe 700 or 800 years after the time of the Buddha. And it's also one of the oldest, maybe the oldest printed text. And you can go and see it in the British Museum in London. It hasn't at all been appropriated or expropriated. No. We wouldn't do that. Not the British. Surely not. There it is, sitting there in a glass case. And we went to visit it with Tai. We went to contemplate it. It's very beautiful. So long before the Gutenberg printing press, they were already printing these sutras in China using wood blocks. So it's a very ancient human wisdom that has come down to us through the ages. So we're very lucky to have it. And it offers us, in the sutra, it invites us to challenge 4 notions. The first is the notion of self. Then we have, it says there is no self. And then it says, and there are no human beings. Well, that's a very strange thing to say. Not only are there no human beings, but there's no living beings. Even more weird. What's the point of all this? No living beings and no lifespan. So these ancient teachers somehow identified these 4 notions as being traps, as being ways of viewing, perceiving, understanding the world which are causing suffering. Right? Whenever we encounter a teaching, it's not, we don't study it just to kind of get intellectual stimulation. Right? We always have to ask ourselves the question, what does this have to do with my suffering? This is not philosophy. It's not, playing mental games. It has a connection to our suffering, and what is being offered is a way out. So let's look a little bit more carefully. When we hear that there's no self, what we should understand is that there's no separate self. So this is about our non-separation. And we can approach this teaching in 2 ways, from the dimension of space and in the dimension of time. So in the dimension of time, we can look into our bodies, into our cells, and we can recognize the presence of our ancestors. When I grew up, I went to school in England, and when people asked me where I was from, I had to say, well, I'm half English and half French, because my mother was French and my father's English. But I never felt very comfortable with that answer, because I didn't feel half anything. I felt just wholly me. And sometimes I sort of wondered, well, which half? Is it here? Is it there? Is it diagonal? Is it are there islands? How do you divide it up? And it was only when I came to Plum Village and I encountered Tai's teaching that I realized that what's trapping me is my mental concepts, my notions. And I struggled with it at first. He said, you are your mother. You are your father. You have received the transmission of all that they are. And I thought, no, but I know about, very, very, very basic biology. I've got half my father's DNA and half my mother's DNA. So why are you saying it's 100% my mother and 100% my father? And I was kind of like mentally fighting Tai. And again, it took me a while to understand that the genetic transmission is not the only transmission that we receive. So when your mother smiles to you as a baby, when she plays with you, when she looks into your eyes and laughs, is something being transmitted? You receiving something? You are being shaped, formed. There's an interaction, an interrelatedness. It's very interesting, when these Buddhists, they say no separate self. Even there are some neuroscientists these days that say there's no such thing as a brain. Another weird statement to challenge our minds, to challenge our concepts. What they mean is there's no such thing as a brain on its own. A brain only arises, only becomes a brain in interaction. Interaction with the body, you are an embodied brain, embodied consciousness, but also in relationship. The human brain does not develop into a normal human brain if nobody plays with you, if nobody loves you. This is very important to understand. If nobody talks to you, if nobody makes eye contact, if nobody makes you feel like your inner world is real. So the brain, different parts of the brain develop in relationship. That's why they say there's no individual brain. So what I received from my mother, from my father, is also a way of being. It's their enthusiasm, their playfulness, their love, their joy, also their sorrow, also sometimes their disappointment, their regret. I got all of it. And it's my responsibility to take good care of it, to take good care of everything I received. And if I'm here now, a monk, it's also not exactly an individual matter. It wasn't just my decision. Maybe that decision had to be watered over many, many generations. Maybe there had to be many, many kind of attempts to find a better way to live. My grandfather, my mother's father, was in many ways a deeply spiritual man. He was a man in search of spirituality, and he struggled to find a good path. There wasn't a path available to him. And it was a constant source of frustration and suffering because he saw the contradiction between what he longed for and what he actually did, the way he was, the way he behaved, the way he treated my grandmother, the way he treated his children. Luckily, he had a second chance with his grandchildren. He was a wonderful grandfather. But I feel like my decision to become a monk is also his decision. So I am not exactly separate in the dimension of time. I am a stream, part of a stream which has been flowing since the non-beginning. The warmth of your body, when did it start? This 37 degrees Celsius? It's an uninterrupted stream. If there had been any interruption, you wouldn't be here. This heartbeat, is it mine? Not exactly. It's my mother's heart, my father's heart, my grandparents' hearts. They're all beating in me. And that's why I can come and offer this talk today as well, because I don't have to do it alone. I can let them do it. And I am not just the product of that stream of genetic and cultural and spiritual transmission from my blood family, but also from many, many different streams. Maybe there was a teacher in school who was kind to you, who paid attention to you, who let you know that you were there, that they knew that you were there. That teacher is in you, is part of you. We continue each other, always. And we know we're not separate in terms of space either. Right? Although it might look like it, we kind of, because of this strong notion of separation, of separate self, we kind of draw outlines around ourselves and say, well, this is me and that is not me. But we're in constant interaction. The breath, food, even our feelings. Our feelings are not exactly ours. Our thoughts are not exactly ours. They're constantly reverberating, being exchanged, passing back and forth. And there's lots of fun ways to play with that, to experiment with that. I sometimes ask people to make pairs in a group and then to share with each other. So one person listens, one person shares, and the one who listens is supposed to stay completely blank, not react.
I see.
Totally indifferent. And the one who shares has to share the most joyful, inspiring, amazing thing that happened to them in the last week. And the other one has to just listen. I'm not feeling anything, that's your feeling, my feeling is nothing, neutral. And they get so annoyed, and they're like, I couldn't do it. It's like, well, of course you couldn't do it. Because we're not separate. We reverberate. We feel each other's feelings. There's no hard line between me and you. There isn't really a point at which you stop and I start. We're in this continuum of interdependence. So why do they say there's no human beings? No human being. Well, one aspect is that the teachers want to help us not to be overconfident. We're a little proud sometimes of our humanity. We think we're very special. We think we have special rights to use what is there, to extract resources, to eat other animals, other living beings, sometimes even to exploit other human beings if we categorize them as not really human. But when we look more deeply, we see that this human is just a notion. If you ask the bacteria in your gut, are you human? They'll be like, what are you talking about? What is this notion, human being? I never heard of it. I'm just happily living my life as the intestinal flora. Very happy. I will continue after you think you've died. They are completely unconcerned by this notion of human. We may be overconfident, we may also have shame and guilt about being human. We may think that humans are the problem. And we do hear that sometimes. We heard it in the time of the pandemic. Maybe there's a feeling that, let the pandemic run wild. Is Mother Earth correcting the balance? We're the virus. We're the ones causing all the harm. Maybe we do deserve to die. That is a thought which can come up. But when we look more deeply, we see that we're not... we can be less certain of ourselves. You can ask, am I sure that I'm human or just human? There's a wonderful researcher called Jaak Panksepp. And he noticed that when he used to do experiments on rats, and he noticed that the rats behave differently, they perform differently according to how you pick them up. So the usual way in a laboratory with rats is to pick them up by the tail, because they can't bite you, they can't do anything, and then you drop them in the maze or whatever. But he noticed that if you pick them up with love, and you stroke them, and you say hello, then they behave differently. What a surprise! Who would have thought that? So he changed track. He decided that he needed to understand this more. And he started, and what he discovered is that there are at least 7 structures in the brain that are shared by all mammals. And when these different structures are stimulated, you get recognizable emotional states that are also shared by all mammals. And for a long time, we humans have wanted to convince ourselves, at least the scientific community has wanted to convince itself that animals don't have emotions. And if they don't have emotions, it's very convenient because we can eat them, we can do experiments on them, we can use them. But now we have to check again. So there was recently a law passed in the UK declaring animal sentience. And Sister Dedication and I, when we found that out, we immediately asked each other, well, which animals? Which ones are they allowing to join the rank of sentient beings? And you'd be happy to know that lobsters and octopuses were included, along with many other different kinds of animals. But it's important because it means maybe they start to have rights. They start to be treated with a little bit more care and consideration. So, in a way, human is more like a cloud. We're a little bit like fuzzy. We have fuzzy edges. We don't really have any edge at all. And we're as much tree as human. Right? If there were no trees, we wouldn't have oxygen to breathe. So, are we really just human? No. There's actually a word in English that I would like to ban, if I'm allowed to. I don't think I am, but just for fun. And it's this, the word just. And I don't mean just in terms of justice, but I mean just in terms of, it's just, you're just a human. Nothing is just anything. Everything is everything else. Right? That's the insight of into being. Nothing is just itself, by itself, alone, separate. Everything is in this vast, interconnected web of interdependence. Why do we say that there are no living beings? Because we want to help remove the discrimination between the categories of living and non-living, animate and inanimate. We sometimes think that there are parts of the cosmos that we can just kind of use indiscriminately and it doesn't do any harm. The rock, you can just mine it. It doesn't hurt. And we sometimes even think that about living beings. But are we so sure about where that line lies between the living and the non-living? We tend to operate within the confines of a worldview which can be understood as materialism. We think that there's stuff, there's matter. It's such a dominant worldview that it's barely visible anymore. It's just there in the background. We just operate on the basis of it. It's very, very difficult to check and ask, am I sure about this thing that I call matter? For me as a teenager, the view of materialism was very, at once, convincing. I thought it was logically compelling, but it was also very bleak. Because if there's just matter, if there's just stuff, particles bouncing off each other, according to physical laws, deterministic, then it's meaningless. We're just automata. You just start the Big Bang and the universe just runs. It's just like clockwork. And many scientists still think that. Even if there's indeterminacy. Okay, we're not going to go too much into that. But they say the indeterminacy is purely random, acausal. So still meaningless, still very bleak. And when I came to Plum Village, I was in search of something else. I was 19 years old, my mother had just died. And I was trying to understand, how can I understand my mother's death? How can I make sense of it? Because within my worldview that I had embraced, well, it was just meaningless. The person, my mother, was just equivalent to her brain activity, to some firing of neurons and, transmission of neurotransmitters. And as soon as that stopped, then that person ceases to exist. They're gone. And it doesn't mean anything. She was living, now she's dead. But and so I came to Plum Village with this search in my heart, looking for, I wanted to check, am I sure? Or is there something else? And by something else, I was actually looking for, I had some weird ideas. I thought I was going to find, some kind of like altered mental states or heightened perception, or maybe I was going to learn to levitate or, interact with, non-material beings. I had all kinds of crazy notions. I thought, if anybody can tell me, it's Thai. He can sort this out for me. I didn't know Thai. Somebody told me he was enlightened. So I thought, well, surely, if somebody knows, it's the enlightened guy. So I came here and I was like listening to Thai and trying to check everything he was saying, trying to check if there was some hint at this other world, this other dimension of magic, of depth, of meaning, of purpose. And he kept talking about your relationships with your mother, with your father, with your ancestors, with the earth, with your body. I thought, this is so boring, it's so mundane. Come on, where's the good stuff? And when are you going to tell us the magic? The secret stuff. I find it very frustrating. But of course, what Tai was doing was offering me a way to re-examine my certainty, my belief in this so-called dead material world. Look at an electron, if you can. If you can imagine an electron, what do we know about electrons? When you read about the most up-to-date descriptions of electrons, they don't sound dead. They sound very alive. Spinning, interacting. They're not inert matter. They don't seem very inert at all. They're constantly, apparently, fizzing in and out of existence in a quantum foam. I mean, it's mind-boggling, completely bonkers. But the one thing they don't sound is dead. You look at the moon on a full moon night. Do you think the moon is dead? There's a wonderful architect and mathematician and thinker that I really admire. He died recently this year, called Christopher Alexander. And he was convinced that in some way everything was alive. And he was inviting us to check for ourselves. And so he said, when you compare two things, compare, for example, two buildings, and he would put like a 16th century Tudor manor alongside a concrete Bauhaus block of flats from the 60s. And he would put these two photos side by side and he said, well, ask yourself, which one has more life? Which one is more alive? And the extraordinary thing is that when you ask people, everybody agrees. There's no question in people's minds that the 16th century Tudor manor is more alive. It's very interesting. You can try this experiment. The only category of people who struggle with this is architects. Because they don't like it. They feel, and they would say to him, he had students, they say, well, the question's not fair. Interesting. Because their training tells them to answer something different. They say, well, the Bauhaus is modern, it's progressive, it's interesting. But there's something undeniable about the quality of life it speaks to us. We can recognize it. One night I was camping by the river Dordogne. It was a full moon night. And the light was so bright, so golden. I couldn't sleep. So I sat in meditation. And I contemplated the cliff, which was illuminated by the moonlight and also by the reflection of the moonlight off the water. And I asked myself, is the cliff dead? Is this place dead? And it's undeniable. There is life here. It's alive. The earth is alive. There's something to investigate, to look into, to open our eyes and our senses and to ask ourselves, when do I ascribe the property of life to things and the property of non-life to things? It's just a concept. I just made it up. It might not be real. It might not correspond to reality. So the teachers are helping us to remove the notion of living beings in order to see what is really there. The fewer notions we have, the more we can see what's really there. Our language traps us. We have the maybe misfortune to be a bit colonized by the English language. The English language is 30% verbs. But there are other languages which are very different. So we learned about the language called Potawatomi, which First Nations Native American language, Potawatomi. And in that language there are 70% verbs. So I don't think you can say cliff in Potawatomi. You can say there is cliffing. It's not a noun, it's a verb. You can't say there is a river, there is rivering. And look, a river is not a static thing, it's a process. And it's not a separate thing. It's in interaction with its environment. So we're learning to re-see the world, to see anew, to transform our consciousness, to transform our ways of thinking. And this makes a difference. It makes a difference to our whole society. When we look at the notion of lifespan, we may be very sure that things are born and they die. They have a beginning and an end. But we should re-examine that too. We should look again. I have in my pocket a leaf. Very nice, heart-shaped leaf. So we have a tendency to see the leaf, and because we have a word for it, leaf, it's a noun, okay? We think that there's such a thing as a leaf. Right? But just having a word for something doesn't mean it's real. Because we have to be very careful how language colonizes our thinking, even our seeing, our perceiving of the world. So how can we remove the notion of leaf? We can examine it in so many different ways. We can ask ourselves, what is the lifespan of a leaf? It's late spring, this leaf is very fresh. But when did it start? Was it the moment the leaf first appeared and we could say, oh, there's a leaf? Or was the leaf already in the bud, preparing itself in autumn? Was the leaf in the branch? Was the leaf in the tree? There's sap, there's glucose, there's minerals. Where did they come from? Can you say leaf without saying tree? Can you say tree without saying forest? Can you say forest without saying earth? Without saying sky? Without saying sun, moon, and stars? If you take away any one of those things, can there still be a leaf? Try and take the sun out of the leaf. I challenge you. Can you do it? Can you see the sun in the leaf? This is a training. This is a way of training our mind, freeing ourselves from the bonds of language, of thinking that trap us, that bind us in a system of extraction and exploitation. It's relevant. It makes a difference to how we live. Will the leaf die now that I've plucked it from the vine? It's actually a kind of ivy. Is it going to die? Is it already dying? What happens if I put it back on the earth? Will it become compost, mulch? It'll get decomposed. It'll get reabsorbed by the roots of some other plant. become another leaf? When does it start? When does it stop? Maybe the notions of starting and stopping are wrong. They don't apply to reality. Can I really say that the moment my mother's brain activity ceased, she died? I'm not sure anymore. Because right now, she feels very alive. She's with us now. She's participating. And this leaf that we're so sure is a separate thing. Let's examine it from another angle. Where is the leaf? Is it outside of you or inside? Anybody want to risk answering that one? It's a trick question. So Buddhism is not materialism, but it's also not idealism. It's neither. It transcends both. So we don't think that the leaf is only in our mind. Of course, the leaf is somehow in our mind consciousness, in our I consciousness, is interacting with you. Actually, it's changing you. It's not only over here. If you're seeing it, it's changing your brain. This is just very basic. Right? There's sight going on, there's neural pathways being reinforced. Your brain is changing. So the leaf is participating, it's interacting. There's light, interacting, participating. And the light arrives, it's white. When it leaves, it's green. Remarkable. Something happened. It's not inert, it's not neutral, it's not inactive. It may be more like a cloud than a leaf. No edge. It's not really localized either. Now we have a tendency to want to localize things, to say it's here, it's either out there, here, or it's in here. But what if it's both? It's part of a stream of interaction and participation. So actually the architect Christopher Alexander offered us a very helpful way of seeing, of adjusting our sight. He said, look at a pond. Imagine a pond. There's one over there. There's another one over there. There's many ponds. So we have a word. It's a noun. Pond. Pond seems to suggest that there is a point at which there is pond and a point at which there is something other than pond. Can you show me where that is? When does the pond stop? Is the pond just the water? Or is it the lotuses? Is it the mud? Is it the grass around? Is it the bank inclined? Is it the rain? Is it the air? Is it our consciousness which sees the pond, interacts with it, participates, enjoys it, celebrates? So he said, instead of seeing things as things, he offered us a way of adapting our view and seeing things as being formed of what he called centers. So he said, well, okay, so there's this thing that we call pond, and it has some reeds, maybe a lotus. Probably not going to draw a very good lotus, but there we go. Okay, something like that. And it has grass, nice grassy bank, maybe there's a tree. And so on. So he said, well, when you look at the pond, you can say, okay, the pond is a center around which there's a kind of radiating force field of pondness which gradually dissipates. The further you get away from the center, it's less and less pond-like, but there's no point at which the pond ceases. When you look at the leaf, and you say, well, the leaf is clearly here, and it's not here, right? The leaf is not the book, the leaf is the leaf. But actually, if you know anything about physics, you know that there's, apparently, electrons, neutrons, protons. Let's just take the electrons. There's a whole lot of electrons. I don't know how many trillions of electrons there are here. But what is an electron? Is an electron a point? Well, no, what they tell us is it's a field of electrical charge which has no edge. Right? This is the strict definition of an electron, which is that the field, the electrical field of an electron, the field of charge, extends through the entire cosmos. Wow, you thought an electron was very small. But maybe it's as vast as the whole of space. Of course, the strength of the field is very slight, but there's no edge. So for sure, the electrons in this leaf are interacting with me, with you, with space, with time, with consciousness. So it's a center of centers. Centers can be nested. Okay, well, that feels like a lot. So let's just see if we can wrap this up. At least I'm going to complete the Noble Eightfold Path with the element of right livelihood. So the idea is that we want to live and consume and produce in such a way as not to cause harm. And that's actually very difficult to do. It's very challenging. And it should be something that we can continuously examine throughout our lives. What am I doing with my life? What are we doing with our lives? Am I still looking to get rich? To have success? Even security? There's an interesting phenomenon even in the environmental movement now called Web3. And it's related to the blockchain, to cryptocurrencies. I don't know all that much about it, but I have some concerns. What I noticed is that people getting into cryptocurrency, very often they kind of proselytize about it, it's going to save the world. But maybe there's a hidden desire. There's a feeling that the situation is getting bad. And maybe I have to protect myself and protect my loved ones. And maybe the best way to do that is to get rich. Quick. Because if I have money, I can be insulated from the destruction that may be coming. But this is, I think, a very dangerous notion. Because we inter-are. When I see someone making a lot of money, Some people have made a lot of money from selling mindfulness, for example. And they buy themselves a big house. And I have compassion for them. Because actually we know that wealth is very closely correlated with carbon footprint. That the more wealthy we are, the more carbon we tend to emit. It's not, and of course, there's good ways to be wealthy. There's ways to use wealth to help, to reduce suffering in the world, of course. So it's not that wealth per se is bad. But we have to ask ourselves, what is enough? What is enough? And can I bring everyone with me? Or is this wealth only for a few? Because if we can't bring everyone with us, we will be disturbed by bad dreams. Because we inter-are. We are co-responsible for the situation. In fact, we, the wealthy Western nations, are responsible for the vast majority of the destruction to our ecosystem right now, to the output of greenhouse gases. And who is suffering the consequences, bearing the brunt of it, is the global south. Those who have done the least to cause the harm are feeling the effects first and have the least capacity to deal with it. But they are part of us. They are in us. If they die, part of us dies. So we cannot insulate ourselves from that. We cannot have a kind of separate security, separate well-being, separate happiness, personal, individual. It doesn't exist. We will have bad dreams. And we will have no peace. So if we really want to have peace, we have to find a way to live that can include everybody. And not just human everybodies, but all the non-human everybodies. We have to respect them. We have to see that they are part of our body as well. And if they die, we die. So there's no such thing as individual wealth, individual success, individual security. We all go together. And it's so wonderful that we're starting to develop a new narrative. We're starting to see past this narrative of individualism, of separation, of just taking care of number one. We're starting to widen our view of what and who we are, to see that we are not beings, but we are interbeings. We are interdependent. And we also have the capacity to cooperate, to collaborate, to share, to live together. That's what we're doing here. This is the experiment. Experiment in co-living, conscious co-living. We're doing it. And the beauty of this is when you take care, when you know how to take care of the suffering, when you know how to look deeply into the roots of the suffering in order to metabolize it, to transform the pain, the fear, the doom, the overwhelm into compassion, into the desire to help, into love, you feel better. We feel better. Compassion is a wonderful feeling. A person who has compassion in their hearts can be a very happy person. And when you're nourished by that kind of happiness, you don't need to consume so much. You don't depend on consumption then for your well-being, for your happiness. Yeah, we need to have enough, sure, to live, to get by. But it's very important to determine How much is enough? It's probably less than you think. We can live very happily when we have a simple life, when we know how to generate well-being. We don't make ourselves dependent on external conditions for our well-being. We can take any kind of external conditions, even when there's injustice, even when there's suffering, and we know how to metabolize it, how to turn it into compassion, and we feel very well. And nobody can take that from us. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive for political freedom, for equal rights, for justice. We should. But we don't wait. We don't wait to realize those things in order to have happiness. We can have happiness now. And that happiness, that freedom, that compassion is part of the way in which we can realize the dream of having rights and justice. It helps. So, I will stop there. And tomorrow we will look more deeply into this question of our ethical path, our ethical toolkit. It's the 5 mindfulness trainings. Yes, and we have many more wonderful things to discover and share together, and we're very fortunate this week to be joined by our friends from Pro-Social World, who have come here to share with us also their vision for a world that works for all. And we are joined by many, many wonderful friends from different organizations who are doing very much the same kind of thing. So this is really a festival of transforming our views, transforming our mind, finding a better way to live together. Thank you for joining us on that journey. We are so fortunate that Suko Chen Kong has returned from Vietnam to be with us.
So dear friends, please stand up to welcome back our beloved Sister Chen Kong.
This is a happy moment.
Thank you for being here and so crowded. I do not expect that this so crowded and attentive to such deep sharing. Sometimes I don't understand. Because I'm only 48 years old or 85 years old. I don't know. I'm 85, yeah, but I like to sing a lot, and I continue to be young. Thank you for being here, all together, and wish to have a wonderful retreat. Bye-bye.